Yeah, thank you so much for being here today. And thank you, Todd and Meredith College for having me. So yeah, I'm gonna talk a little bit about myself, my background, and then some of the inspirations and the themes of the work in the show. So before I get started, I just want all of you guys to look at these two words on the screen, and just take a moment to think about what your definitions of medicine and health are. So like think about what sort of images come to mind, memories, different emotions, places that you associate them with. And then this will be a reoccurring theme of this talk and my work. So a little bit of background about me. I grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina. I was always drawing and painting as a kid. I took some art classes at a Chinese school during middle school, and then I ended up attending Weaver Academy, which is a magnet high school for visual and performing arts. I didn't really think a lot about medicine or health as a kid, other than what was like taught in school. Yeah, but so these are some of the pieces I've done when I was a kid. So if you actually Google it, these are the standard definitions of these two words. So medicine being a science or a practice of the diagnosis, treatment, or prevention of disease, and health being a state of being free of illness or injury. And this is generally how I saw medicine and health growing up, as very like well-defined processes to follow in very binary states of being. So like illness versus health. Um, when I was ended up starting to apply to college, I didn't really think I wanted to go to art school. I think mostly because I knew I was not going to be able to find a job, at least for me. But yeah, I ended up really liking the kind of the role that was kind of shown to me as a health practitioner. Um, Knowing that you had like the knowledge and the skills to be able to help people through medicine and food. So I ended up going to Cornell University to get my bachelor's in nutritional science. And then I came back to UNC Chapel Hill to get a master's of public health and become a registered dietitian. Um, but this is what I thought well-being looked like. It was a very formulaic process that studied people with specific steps and interventions and measurements. Um, and that came from a very specific mindset in Western academia that favored logic, objectivity, hypermasculinity. And during this time of school, I ended up stopping painting altogether for 5 years. But I picked it up a little bit more during the end of my master's program. Um, and so I started heading towards a PhD program, wanting to do public health nutrition research. But I realized, I think, while I got back into painting, that art making was just as valid a way to do research and to explore well-being within communities, the environment, and the self. So I ended up declining all of my PhD offers and wanting to do art a little bit more full-time and a little bit more focused. So yeah, that was a fun decision. Um, yeah, and I think around the time as well, I had some like health issues going on. I ended up seeing a Chinese doctor to treat them, and it really did help me a lot. And I got really interested in this more like intuitive, fluid framework of medicine that my family and my own ancestry and ethnicity has taught me. So I started self-studying a lot of Chinese medicine over the past 3 years. And it's become a huge theme in my work. So I'm gonna go over like three major frameworks that kind of underscore a lot of my work and my research. So this might be familiar to you guys. It's like the yin yang symbol. So this concept of yin and yang represents two opposite yet complementary forces that kind of govern the whole universe. And the framework tells us that living is a constant and never-ending kind of seesaw between the two, where our equilibrium is always shifting and adjusting to our needs and the changing environment. Sometimes people will kind of oversimplify or conflate yin and yang as being, like female or male. And that's a really binary, not accurate way to look at it. If you actually look at even like the origins of the words themselves in the Chinese language, it's really a story about light. So yin being what occurs in the shade and in the moonlight, and yang being what occurs in the sun and in the light. So you can actually see the movement and cycles between the two in your day-to-day life. So thinking about like the sun setting from day to night, or um, the contraction of energy and the release of emotions during the fall from that transition from summer to winter. It can get a lot more complex than this, but just in general, Chinese medicine, the concept of health is really about finding balance and movement between these two things. So in the body, the spirit, in our relationships in society. Um, so yeah, in when there is like imbalance between these two, that's when you start seeing illness and disease. So you can see a lot of this imbalance, not only in our bodies, but in society. So like right now, I would say that our society has a lot of emphasis and celebration of the yang side of this. So thinking about like productivity, logic, activity, that can all manifest into the things that we see in like violence and hypermasculinity and even war today. Um, Yeah, and as an example, to bring it into more herbalism practice, I really like this example of yin and yang that kind of occurs within a single whole being and across time. So if you look at this, the fresh actual flesh of an orange in Chinese medicine is very energetically cooling to the body. It's hydrating and nourishes our yin and it replenishes the fluid in our body. But if you actually peel back the peel of the fruit and you age it and you dry it in the sun over years and even decades, it concentrates that medicinal quality and it actually becomes more warming to the body and invigorating and to both our digestion and blood movement. So I just thought this was like a really beautiful kind of metaphor of like it being within a single whole. Um, Yeah, and then another framework is the five elements. So these are another kind of framework that kind of governs the universe and cycles of time and life and society. So the five elements are fire, earth, metal, water, and wood, and they all kind of correspond to different movements, different seasons, different organs in the body, different emotions, and paths across nature. And actually, the Chinese word, which I kind of forgot, but it actually more accurately it translated into movements rather than elements. So that kind of talks about, again, movement and cycling through all of these. And yeah, again, we cycle through these five elements across the calendar year, across a life cycle, and across generations as well. I'll go into more specifics on a few of these when I talk about some of the pieces. Then another major concept is meridians. So if you guys have ever heard of like acupuncture, that's like when doctors stick like small little needles into your body. Basically, there's many different channels that run throughout our bodies, and these different channels can correspond to different organs or different parts of our being. And these channels carry and circulate both energy and chi across our bodies. And you can either apply pressure yourself to them, or you can you can actually get acupuncture from a doctor. And the main use of this system is to help harmonize different imbalances in the body again. On the right side, you will see examples of something called transporting points on your arms and your legs, so your limbs. And basically, these are points that kind of get deeper as you go up your body. So the points on the tips of your fingers and your toes are the most superficial, and that's where your chi is the most influenced by um, outside factors like the climate or other external factors. And these points represent our connections between the body and the environment. As you move up the limb towards your elbows and your knees, that's where the points start getting deeper and more vast. So yeah, the lower right image kind of helps illustrate that concept through like a river or a channel of water. The tips of your fingers kind of being these like small streams, and it kind of pooling into like a large sea at the bottom. Another thing that really influenced this body of work was this book right here, called Body Maps by Lan A. Lee. They're a historian and a really cool filmmaker that focuses on body, medicine, and health in the global East Asia. They're also a professor at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, and they do a lot of work around this kind of topic. But basically, this book looks at a lot around the history of invisible anatomy through hand-drawn illustrations and maps in the body. So you can see here is like kind of an example of that, different meridian channels in the body. So Lon actually compares these images on the body to actual maps. So maps, from their definition, being illustrations that are representational of landscapes, that they provide routes that are symbolic, directional, and are shaped by time in history and cultural and societal factors. And also how maps and the routes on them are not always universal, timeless. They're kind of shaped by the times that they're in. Very much likewise, illustrations on the body like this are representational and not accurate. So this is what Lon calls a Manchu man. And this image is not only represents the bladder meridian, but also exhibits like a very specific kind of masculinity in China at that time, through the hairstyles, the kind of dress, and the kind of body composition. Similarly, Weeping Woman, which is an illustration from Europe, also kind of reiterates this idea of like womanhood and religious undertones through this imagery. So these historic illustrations carry very like conscious concepts of racialization, genderedness, and aesthetic ideals and expectations. And I think today we would like to think that like if you pick up a medical textbook, medical science is very objective and unbiased, and yeah, unbiased when they present information. Um, but when you actually look at a medical textbook, this is like a very general, like typical illustration that you'll see. And we can see that like this illustration kind of attempts to very accurately depict a specific organ that's very distinct inside a very generalized body. But in reality, organs are really messy. I think humans are very messy. They're very interconnected. They're squishy. They're not very defined. And then the bodies that house these organs don't always look like the bodies that we see in these illustrations. So I think all of that combined in the past 3 years, I started reflecting on my own biases in all this. Being from a very like research background, I started saying like, oh, this is interesting that I would see an image like this and think, oh, this is very accurate and true. And then I'd see an image like this and think like, oh, this is alternative or fictional. But I think I've come to a realization that like in reality, I think both of these have some sort of degree of fact and story in them. Yeah, so now to get a little bit into the title of the show. This is Lo Chichi, and he's a retired professor of photography and ancient Chinese architecture at Tsinghua University in Beijing. And he also my grandfather. He was born in 1930, the year of the metal horse, and he really likes noodles and holding a lot of cameras. He lived through like a lot of very dramatic and violent shifts in Chinese socio-political landscapes. And he's written many, many books in his long and great career. And this is one of the books that he gifted me last year when I went to China to visit him. That was actually translated into English because my Mandarin is horrible. So I can't read a lot of his stuff. But there was a quote in the book that I don't know why it just like kept sticking with me even after a year. So in ancient Chinese architecture, there's a lot of emphasis on harmonizing humanity with nature. So a lot of the structures and the landscapes try to balance being with the earth and connecting to the heavens and our ancestry and our spirituality. So again, yeah, for some reason this passage just stuck with me. And I think just reading the book in general helped me connect to him on a human level through his artistry that I don't think I was ever able to just by like talking to him. Um, yeah, and so the quote itself is about how like this emperor was admiring all this like lotus in his palace. Um, but to get actually to the herb itself, lotus is a plant that's native to the South and Eastern Asia, and it grows in these like floodplains, so very like muddy, sticky, waterlogged environments. And people kind of admire these qualities of it, saying that it's like a symbol of resilience and integrity in very difficult and sticky situations. So you can see here that that's like the stuff on the top, and then this is the root that is actually like underneath. So yeah, there's a lot of different parts to the lotus plant. Here are just a few of them. So you have like the root, you have like the stems and the leaves, you have the pod itself that contains seeds, and then the seeds contain these cores, and then the stamen as well. And all of these different parts of this plant have different medicinal qualities to them in Chinese medicine. I would say generally speaking, they all kind of help regulate and harmonize the circulation of fluid, energy, and emotion in the body. Yeah, and more specifically, lotus root on the left up there enters through the liver and the lung meridians, and they help kind of balance out emotions of anger and grief. And they also help cool and release stagnation of blood. In the middle, you'll see the lotus seeds, and those enter the kidney, the spleen, and the heart meridians. And they help to stabilize and soothe fear in the body as well. And then the leaves on the right, yes, yeah. They help to clear heat and allow us to let go of grief, and they do that through the meridians of the large intestines. Um, so these parts of the plants are used sometimes in like everyday cooking. Like the dishes you see on the bottom, they can also be like dried and ground up or eaten in other ways and mixed with other herbs as medicine. So I use like just the metaphor of lotus as a way to look at environments and nourishment and support of the free flow of energy and self-expression and looking at grief as well. So most of my work now is oil paint and portraiture. Although I'm really interested, and you'll see stuff in the gallery of doing more installation work, incorporating illustration, and actually drying herbs myself. So these are like two of the pieces that are up there right now. And then before I talk about another piece, I'm going to focus a little bit on the element of metal. So sometimes, yeah, one of the more difficult paths and emotions that we move through is the emotion of grief, which is associated with the element of metal. So the actual Chinese word for it is jin, which is actually more accurately translated into gold rather than metal. So gold is being like a very malleable form of metal that can transform through alchemy. And so metal as the element is associated with the autumn, lungs and the large intestines, the color white, pungent flavors like garlic, horseradish, chili, and the emotions of grief. So when we're not able to express or move through grief, it can contract and congest in our lungs, and can make it actually very difficult for our body to disperse nutrients and chi and energy and emotion throughout our body. But when it is able to be expressed and moved through, it can actually strengthen our health as well. You can see on the left this kind of cyclical nature of it, kind of the lung meridian kind of traveling down through the interior of your arm and then coming back up through the large intestines up into your face and your chest as well. see. Yeah. And so that kind of thinking around both lotus and grief and intergenerational stuff and movement all kind of inspired this piece right here. This piece is more about the element of earth. So the element of earth is actually associated with the feelings of stability and the season of either late summer or late season. So it kind of represents this transitional period and stability in times of transition. So when I was thinking about where and with whom we find stability, I was thinking about, yeah, all those themes, especially around times of like erratic change and like violence and a lot of instability in the world and in our interior world, but also in our exterior world. So the illustrations on the walls are based on the spleen and the stomach meridians that are associated with this element as well. And then I dried my own orange peels and I hung them from a very specific point on one of the meridians as again a node to like our interior and our sense of stability as well. This piece is a 4-panel piece that's on the very interior wall. I'm going to come back to this image. I'm going to go forward. Yeah. So this is kind of about the kidneys and the element of water. So the title of this piece is called Ming Men, and that actually references a point on your lower back, right between your two kidneys. And this is actually the point, according to Chinese medicine, where you as a being start. So when the energies of like both of your parents come together, you as a being start at this point, and you kind of branch out from there. So the kidneys represent this kind of life force within us that carry us throughout our entire life cycle, from birth to, you know, reproduction and like fertility to menopause and then death. And then in Western kind of physiological perspective, the kidneys are basically a filter. They filter all of our blood. They are constantly trying to manage like a balance between our fluids, our electrolytes, and kind of maintaining that life force. So I think for me, the kidneys represented this idea of both past, present, and future, thinking about our past, wanting to preserve that for the future, but also staying in the present. Yeah. Um, yeah, and then I like just as a show of like some of what my sketchbook actually looks like. A lot of my sketchbook is not actually sketches. It's like 70% notes and like research, and then like 10% like angsty journaling, and then like 20% I'll actually like draw. But yeah, this specifically this piece, like I just kept like drawing this concept and it just like kept coming up for like a month or two. And I think that's when I knew that like I had to like actually like really look into it. And that's happened a few times. I'll just be like sketching and then I'll sketch like in a month and like the same thing will come out. And that's how I know I'm like, okay, this is something I need to like look into for whatever reason. Um, But yeah, these are some other pieces that I did like maybe 1 or 2 years ago. Again, around the ideas of like movement and stagnation of both energy and blood and emotions and kind of moving through that in different stages of my life. Yeah. So then to get back to these terms, I think now my definitions of medicine and health have changed, and I think they continue to change. So for me now, medicine is less of this kind of evidence-based idea of like specific procedures or specific prescriptions that you give to people. But for me now, I think it's more of this ongoing process of noticing what we need in each moment and then offering what we can to ourselves and the people around us. And then I think health is less about these binary states of diagnosis of illness or health, but more about supporting an environment where we are allowed to move freely, and that free flow of chi, energy, emotion, and expression of the creative self. Yeah. So I'll just end with this. I think when I was talking to my friend Leland about this, she's actually an acupuncturist and a Chinese medicine doctor based in Durham. She told me that when she heard noble, she associated that word with both righteousness and integrity. And for her, it reminded her of the element of metal. So again, the metal is very much about acknowledgement and understanding of your grief. Um, Grief about pieces of yourself, about people, places, things that we've lost, and have never been able to kind of reconcile with. Metal is also about deep breathing, exhaling, moving through it rather than stuffing it down. So I think in general, this body of work is more about like acknowledgement and finding spaces and routes of medicine that you're able to process all of that. And I think the work itself is like just me spanning like different stages of my life, and different seasons, and reflecting on even different generations and kind of moving through that as well.